If you ask me what wealthy people understand about money that most ordinary people miss, I would not begin with some secret stock tip or an exotic tax trick. I would begin with a map, because that is what money management really is. It is not a pile of hacks. It is not a game for people who love spreadsheets. It is not reserved for bankers, accountants, or the sort of people who use words like asset allocation at dinner. It is, at the foundation, a map of where you are, a map of where you want to go, a map of what is helping you, a map of what is quietly dragging you backward. Most people do not fail financially because they are incapable of understanding money. They fail because they are moving without a map. They earn, they spend, they react, they drift, they make one decision at a time without ever connecting that decision to the life they say they want. Then one day they look up and wonder why they have been busy for a decade and still feel no freer. That is not usually a mystery. It is usually a design problem. I have spent much of my life around capital, businesses, markets, and people trying to improve their circumstances. One lesson returns again and again. People love to think that wealth is built with brilliant moves. In many cases, it is built with honest accounting of where you stand, honest accounting of what you owe, honest accounting of what your life actually costs, honest accounting of what your goals require, honest accounting of which purchases are building freedom and which ones are only performing success. That kind of honesty is not glamorous. It is much better than glamorous. The first thing I would want any person to do with money is not invest. It is not buy property. It is not compare savings accounts, chase high returns, or argue over which stock is about to outperform. The first thing I would want him to do is stop guessing about his own life. Know your numbers. That sounds too simple, which is why so many people skip it. They tell themselves they have a rough sense. They think they know enough. They assume the little leaks are minor, the subscriptions are harmless, the annual surprises are exceptional, and the monthly rhythm in their head is close enough to reality. Usually it is not. Reality is always more detailed than the story people tell themselves. I would want to know my real after-tax income, not the salary I mentioned to strangers. I would want to know my real annual expenses, not the hopeful fiction I carry around. I would want to know the difference between the two. And I would want to know my net worth. Because income pays for a lifestyle, but net worth buys freedom. That distinction matters enormously. People are often proud of income because income is visible and active. It sounds like progress. It gives them a way to describe themselves. But a person can earn very well and still remain fragile if every dollar flows back out just as quickly. Income can produce the image of strength while net worth reveals the truth. If your assets are not gradually growing relative to what you owe, then your money may be keeping you busy without truly setting you free. That is one of the cleanest ways to understand the difference between motion and progress. So I would start there. What do I own? What do I owe? What comes in? What goes out? Am I building assets or quietly building obligations? Those are not just accounting questions, they are life questions, because every financial decision, once stripped of its emotion, does one of two things. It either strengthens your future or borrows from it. People hear that and think I am only talking about obvious debt. I am not. A bloated lifestyle can borrow from the future just as effectively as a loan can. Expectations can do it. Poor planning can do it. Buying things for appearance instead of utility can do it. Drifting through your income year after year without ever measuring the gap between earning and spending can do it. That gap is everything. A negative gap means you are bleeding. A positive gap means you are breathing. And the larger that positive gap, the more options begin opening in your life. You can save more, you can invest more, you can handle disruption better, you can buy back time, you can say no with less fear. That is why I have always believed the real purpose of money is not display, it is optionality. But before you can build that optionality, you have to deal honestly with whatever is already chained to your ankle. That brings me to debt. People often speak of debt as though it were morally uniform. It is not. Some debt may support a future earning asset or improve long-term capacity. Other debt is simply expensive consumption pretending to be progress. One kind of debt can, under the right conditions, make your life stronger. The other kind drains your future while flattering you in the present. The distinction is not academic. High interest credit card debt is not merely inconvenient. It is a direct attack on your capacity to build wealth. It compounds against you. It takes the very force that should be working in your favor and turns it into a tax on your impatience. Payday loans and sloppy consumer financing operate the same way. They look manageable because the monthly figure is made to feel manageable. But the total cost, the drag, the narrowing of future flexibility, all of that gets hidden behind the presentation. That is why if I had debt, I would get every piece of it into the open balance. Interest rate, minimum payment, due date, flexibility, if any, and then I would attack it with structure. I do not care whether a person uses the avalanche method because it is mathematically superior or the snowball method because quick wins help him stay engaged. Both are better than denial. The only strategy I have very little respect for is confusion. Confusion feels softer today. It tends to become much harsher tomorrow. I have often thought that one of the most valuable shifts in finance is when a person stops looking at money as a sequence of isolated transactions and starts seeing it as a system. The debt is part of a system. The savings are part of a system. The goals are part of a system. The car decision is part of a system. The housing decision is part of a system. When people fail, they usually fail systemically long before it becomes obvious numerically. That is why goals matter so much. Not because goals are motivational wallpaper, because the timeline of a goal changes the correct behavior around money. This is one of the biggest sources of nonsense in personal finance. People talk as though all money should be treated the same. It should not. Money needed in a year should behave one way. Money needed in 10 years should behave another. Money meant for retirement, decades away, should behave differently. Again, if you mix those buckets, you create emotional conflict inside your own financial life. You put short-term anxiety in the same room as long-term investing. You ask safety money to take market risk. You ask long-term money to sit still in places where inflation erodes it. You make every part of the system work less well because you never decided what each part was for. That is why I would write my goals down, one by one, with a rough date beside each of them. Emergency reserve, holiday, house deposit, school fees, busyness, capital, retirement, support for children later in life. Whatever matters, because once the timeline is visible, the strategy becomes much clearer. Money for the next few years should stay safe and accessible. Money for 5 to 15 years can begin working harder, depending on risk tolerance and flexibility. Money for 15 years and beyond should, in most cases, be invested, because time is one of the strongest allies an ordinary person will ever have. That is not ideology, it is structure. The problem is that many people skip structure because they are impatient for tactics. They want the answer to be one account, one return, one product, one decision that seems to solve everything. Real life is more intelligent than that. It asks you to match tools to purpose. And once you know the purpose, budgeting stops being a punishment and starts becoming navigation. I know many people hate the word budget. They hear restriction, they hear less pleasure, they hear judgment, but I have never thought of budgeting that way. A real budget is not a prison. It is an instrument panel. It shows whether the road you are on actually leads toward the destinations you say matter. Without that, a person is only driving. You can drive a long time without getting anywhere useful. What I like about a yearly view is that it captures the truth people usually miss. It catches the annual insurance bill, the wedding trip, the Christmas overspend, the surprise repairs, the expensive month you tell yourself was unusual, even though some version of it always arrives. Month by month, people flatter themselves. Year by year, reality becomes much harder to hide. That is why I prefer first to ask, if I keep living exactly as I have been living, what will the next 12 months produce? Only then do I want to ask how to improve it. Can I move more toward savings? Can I attack debt faster? Can I reduce the spending that does not serve the life I actually want? Can I negotiate recurring costs lower? Can I turn what I claim matters into something my numbers actually support? Those are useful questions. Notice how little of this has to do with intelligence in the conventional sense. It has far more to do with honesty, self-awareness, and behavior. Money is social and emotional before it is mathematical. The mathematics matter, but the mathematics often become obvious the moment a person stops hiding from his own habits. That brings me to savings, which are often handled poorly in both directions. Some people leave money in miserable accounts out of laziness, letting a bank earn off their passivity. Other people become so hungry for return that they stop respecting what cash is for. Both errors come from not understanding job assignment. Cash has a job. Its job is not to impress. Its job is not to maximize return. Its job is to provide stability, access, and time banks. Understand this very well, even if customers do not. They make money on the spread between what your money earns sitting there and what they can lend it out for elsewhere. If you never compare rates, never think about account types, never distinguish between easy access and money that can be locked for a period, you are often giving away value simply because you never made the choice consciously. I am not saying every dollar must be optimized to the last decimal place. Life is too short for that. I am saying that passivity with cash is often just another form of leakage. Money sitting with no purpose and no return is not being safe. It is being neglected. Of course, there is another side to that. A person can become so afraid of investing that cash turns from stability into hiding. That is also a mistake. There comes a point when failing to invest is not prudence but delay. I like the framework that says the first task is a modest cash buffer, then the elimination of truly toxic high-interest debt, and then the simultaneous building of a fuller emergency fund alongside long-term investing. It is psychologically smarter than demanding that one thing be completed perfectly before the next thing can even begin. People need momentum. They need to see protection rising and future growth starting. That is how you keep morale and structure working together. And then we arrive at investing. People love to ask when to invest, as if there is a ceremonial bell that rings. There is not. The real question is whether you have enough structure around your life that market volatility will not immediately turn into panic. If you have no cushion, no debt discipline, no clarity, and no sense of timeline, the market will often teach you lessons you could have learned more gently elsewhere. But once the foundation exists, every year of delay matters. That is something people do not appreciate enough. They think in calendar years, markets think in compounding years. The money you do not put to work today does not merely lose 1 year. It loses all the future returns that year might have generated as well. This is why delay feels harmless emotionally and becomes costly financially. Now, I am not a great admirer of complexity for its own sake. For the average person, the case for broad, low-cost investing is overwhelming. Diversification, simplicity, low fees, and long time horizons are an extraordinarily powerful combination. Fees matter, taxes matter, account structure matters. There is no honor in paying more friction than necessary. And personal risk capacity matters too. One of the more sensible ideas in the material you gave me is that investment strategy should evolve across life rather than remain frozen forever. That is obviously true. A 28-year-old with decades ahead and strong earnings capacity can often tolerate more market risk than a 60-year-old near retirement who needs to protect what has already been built. But even here, I would go further. The arithmetic of age is only a starting point. Temperament matters, sleep matters. If your portfolio is theoretically optimal and practically unbearable, it is not optimal for you. This is why personal finance is personal without becoming arbitrary. The principles are stable, the proportions may vary. And then there are the two large destroyers of ordinary wealth that people manage to treat casually, the car and the house. I have long believed that many households are not beaten by one catastrophic mistake. They are beaten by a series of socially respectable decisions that quietly overbuild their fixed costs. Cars are near the top of that list. Transportation is one of the largest recurring drains in modern life, and yet people speak about cars with astonishing emotional looseness. They focus on the monthly payment because the dealer wants them focused there. They focus on how the car feels, how it looks, how it signals, how it upgrades their identity. Much less attention is paid to total ownership cost, interest paid, depreciation, insurance, maintenance, and what the payment does to the rest of the system. That is madness. A car is a useful machine. It can also become a wealth shredder wrapped in leather and social approval. I have sympathy for people who love cars. Preferences are real. But preference does not excuse arithmetic. If transportation begins swallowing a dangerous share of income, then it is no longer just an interest. It is a structural problem. That is why guardrails help. Whether one uses a 25 to 35% of income framework for purchase price or a 24-10 style framework for down payment, loan term, and monthly burden. The spirit of the thing is the same. Do not let the transaction be designed by the seller's psychology. Design it around your own long-term freedom. And never ever let the monthly number hypnotize you into forgetting the total. The same logic runs through housing, though with even more complexity. People discuss buy versus rent as though it were a moral question. It is not. It is a capital allocation question with a psychological dimension attached. Buying has stability, control, permanence, and the possibility of appreciation. Renting has flexibility, lower responsibility for maintenance, and often lower sunk cost in certain contexts. Neither is automatically superior in all conditions. That is the kind of lazy rule people inherit from older generations whose housing markets, rates, and opportunities may have been materially different. A wise person does not outsource such a large decision to nostalgia. He looks at the numbers and the life he actually wants: property taxes, legal fees, transaction costs, maintenance, opportunity cost of the down payment, mortgage interest, flexibility, the real possibility that the invested alternative might outperform, the equally real value of psychological stability if ownership suits your life. All of these belong in the analysis. Housing is not just a purchase. It is a system of trade-offs. And here is what I think many people miss. The right decision is not always the one that looks richest from the outside. It is the one that makes the rest of the system work. That is the through line in everything. The wealthy do not merely earn differently. They assign money differently. They do not let all dollars carry the same job. They do not let one exciting purchase rewrite all future flexibility. They do not confuse busyness with progress. They do not ask one decision to do 10 emotional jobs at once. They know where they stand. They know where they want to go. They know what is working. They know what is expensive theater. They know that every major money decision either widens or narrows their future. This is why I do not think managing money like the wealthy is really about mimicking external behavior. It is about internal structure. Structure says know your true position. Structure says eliminate the debts that are burning holes in the floor. Structure says timelines determine tools. Structure says budgets are roadmaps, not punishments. Structure says cash has a role and investing has a role. Structure says waiting forever is costly, but rushing without foundations is foolish. Structure says fees, taxes, and account choice matter. Structure says the car should serve the life, not the ego. Structure says the house decision must fit the whole system, not just the fantasy of ownership. When you see it that way, wealth stops looking mystical. It becomes practical. Still difficult in places. Yes, life remains unequal and disruptive, but practical. And practicality is liberating. It means you do not need a finance degree to become sound with money. It means you do not need to love numbers for their own sake. It means you do not need to be born rich. You need clarity, structure, and the willingness to live by what the numbers reveal rather than by whatever story flatters you most this month. I have always trusted simple ideas that survive long periods of time. Spend less than you earn. Know the gap. Build assets. Respect liabilities. Kill expensive debt. Protect your downside with cash put. Long-term money to work. Remove friction where you can. Do not let the car colonize your future. Do not let the house become a religious belief. And for heaven's sake, stop acting as though a lack of measurement is somehow freedom. It is not freedom, it is fog. A foggy life can still feel busy. It can even feel impressive. But it rarely becomes financially strong. Strength comes from visibility. Visibility of what is true. Visibility of what is costing you. Visibility of what your goals demand. Visibility of the fact that money, when handled properly, is not there to entertain you. It is there to buy back control. That is why, if I wanted to manage money like the truly disciplined wealthy, I would not start by asking what they buy. I would start by asking how they think. And the answer would be something like this. They think in systems. They think in timelines. They think in trade-offs. They think in net worth, not just income. They think in freedom, not just lifestyle. They think in total cost, not just monthly payment. They think in structure before tactics. That way of thinking will never trend the way flashy advice trends. It does something much better. It works. And if it works long enough, quietly enough, and consistently enough, it can turn ordinary earnings, ordinary decisions, and ordinary discipline into a very extraordinary thing, a life that is no longer easy to corner. That is what I call wealth.